Welcome, everybody. This is Tuesday, February 18th, a few minutes after 6 o'clock. This is a joint meeting of the Gilroy Gardens Board and the Gilroy City Council. This is the first time we've ever done something like this, and so I'm really looking forward to a positive outcome. I'd like to call this meeting to order. And I guess, Shauna, you still have to do roll call, correct?
Yes, sir. Marie Blankley.
Here.
Dion Bracco. Peter LaRomanos. Carol Marks.
Here.
Fred Tovar.
Here.
Kat Tucker.
Here.
Roland Velasco.
Here. Thank you. And so tonight we have one discussion item. It's a proposed vision and master plan for the Gilroy Gardens. And then afterwards, after the two boards have had an opportunity to discuss, I'll go ahead and open it up to the public and see if anybody has any comments for the council and for the board. With that, let me go ahead and turn it over to Greg Edgar, who is the chairperson for the Gilroy Gardens Board, and he can make a few opening comments.
Thanks, Roland. Before we get going, I'd like to introduce some important people that we've got at Gilroy Gardens. Barb Granter, who is our general manager. She's been with us for 17 years. Patty Stevens, our controller. Patty, you want to raise your hand? Wah Lee, 17 years, is our assistant general manager at Gilroy Gardens. And then we've got a fantastic board that I'm extremely proud of. We've got Jay Boxa, who is currently acting as our treasurer. He's been in city government for 48 years, 25 years as city administrator for Gilroy. His accomplishments have been the Gilroy sewer treatment plant and also instigating and helping out with the purchase of Gilroy Gardens in the city. Jane Howard, our secretary. She's our resident tourism expert and as executive director of the Visit Gilroy. Her achievements include establishing the T-bid, winning the bid to grow Visit Gilroy to Visit California, and Jane has served on our board for 12 years. Jay's been with us for 13, I think we figured out. Rob Onetto, 40 years experience in the private sector in urban planning, civil engineering, and real estate entitlement development. Principal at RJA for 16 years, recreation enthusiast. Rob has served on the board for 12 years. Glenn Pace, 40 years in the real estate development, currently with Pembroke Development, who develops large-scale master planned communities, and he's completed 4 projects in Gilroy and has been on the board for 11 years. Steve Peet has been a McDonald's franchise owner since 1993, currently owns 18 locations. He's an expert on quick-serve restaurants and staffing challenges in our current increasing minimum wage market, and Steve's been on the board for 8 years. Carol Marks, she's currently with City Council and is our board rep. Dan Harney, former council member, 20 years experience in senior management for high-tech companies. Passionate about recreation and sport for youth, and he served on the board for 4 years. As Roland said, I'm chairman of the board for Gilroy Gardens, and I've been with them since 2007. And in my personal life, I'm senior vice president for Morgan Stanley. With that, I think what we wanted to do tonight was we just wanted to open it up for a conversation between the two boards and get an idea of expectations where each board is currently and where they expect to be in the future with the gardens. Roland?
Okay. Thank you, Greg. So for both bodies, I would hope that we can have a open and honest discussion. We're not here to point fingers at anybody. We are here to trade ideas, to share our thoughts, and again, just be open, honest, frank about it in a very informal. This is about as informal as we could get at City Hall. in this study session. The other thing too, I would be remiss if I didn't say this, and so I just want to put it out there that, you know, as the mayor of the city, as a resident of this great city, I feel blessed that we have a dedicated board that works to make sure that the Gilroy Gardens is successful. That I truly believe that the Gardens is an asset to the community, that it is something for us to be proud of as a city. It is the #1 employer of youth in the community, and that just doesn't happen. It happens because we have dedicated volunteers working hard on the board. We have a very strong docent community that interacts with the public, and all these things, and in fact the partnership with the city, all these things come together to make the Gardens successful, and something that I think Gilroyans can be very, very proud of. So with that, you know, I think where we wanted to start this off is just kind of getting a sense from everybody, and I don't know, Greg, how, you know, who wants to go first necessarily, but just, you know, when we start to think about the Gardens, what are we thinking, and, you know, what is our vision for that particular area? I think it's important for the council to individually start to share our thoughts on this, but ultimately the council has got to get together and you know, come up with a concrete vision for that park. So let's just go ahead and start there. I don't know who wants to go first, if anybody, whether it's a board person, a Gilroy Gardens person, or if it's a council person. Oh, by the way, we're going to have Trevin here to just take notes for us. And if there's some issue, Trevin, that comes up that we're not ready to address tonight, then I would ask you just to put down the question and put it in a parking lot, and we'll figure out what we're going to do with it later, okay? Start with vision, please, and
do we need to go over maybe the history of the purchase?
yeah, there you go. That's okay. Probably a good point. Is there any background information you want to give?
Well, just on the history on the purchase of the park, and then what the board of directors was charged with doing after the purchase. Jay, you want to jump in any time on this? But Bob Kramer and I, in 2006, were looking at the financials of the park and determined at that point that we had a debt service of just over $1 million a year that we had to cover, and we weren't covering it. The park just wasn't making that kind of money. So we approached Jay Boxa, then city manager, and asked him if he thought the city would have any interest in purchasing the property for the cost of retiring the bonds that were outstanding, which was $13.650 million at the time. And Jay then looked at that and said he'd go to the city council, talk about that, get back. That was in '06, so I guess we met with you, Jay, in March of '07, if I'm correct. And then I guess the city signed off on the purchase of February of 2008. With that, Jay and Bob worked on the contract as far as the lease at that time, and the city obviously was in no position to run a park. The nonprofit Gilroy Gardens picked up that lease, and we worked on that, and our job at the time, it still is, was to maintain the park, maintain attendance, increase attendance, and capital improvements and maintenance on buildings and property and so forth. I think we've done a pretty good job with that. Jay, do you want to pick up on that? Nope. Okay. So that's the history of the park, and the board has worked hard. Yes, we've gone through some challenges over the years. Obviously, the recession in 2008 hit us pretty good. Economy up and down. But with the expertise that we've got with Barb and Wah, we've done a tremendous job of expense management over the years, increasing revenue, and holding everything together. So we're pretty proud of what we've done, and I think all the board members can attest to that in one way or the other. We've tried to stay up to date as far as safety out at the park, which has been Glenn Pace's number one pet peeves was the safety. If we might have a shooting out at the park, how are we going to handle that? He's worked together along with Barb and the police department to put together exercises to make sure that we're on top of that the best we can at any time. Rob? Rob, could you give us just a little bit of history as far as the park and the vision that from the sports park and all the way out through Hecker Pass?
Thank you. Caught me off guard there a little bit.
Hang on a second. Just as far as the council and the board members are concerned, if you guys have a question or you want to state something, please just raise your finger, make some noise, flap your arms, send up smoke signals.
Wasn't looking my way.
Something. Do something. Get my attention, then we'll call on you. So hang on a second. Council member, did you want Rob to go first, or did you want to jump in?
No, I would like to ask questions.
Okay,
Greg.
please.
Yeah, I have questions on, since you were going through some of the numbers, the 13.6 million that it cost in the beginning, what at that time was the plan for payback to the city at the time? Do you know?
The city purchased the property, so I'm not quite sure what you mean as far, you mean Gilroy Gardens' responsibility to pay back?
At the time, was there any responsibility, we bought the park, and then we got into a lease, the city got into a lease, right, with the board. What was the expectation at that time for a return on that investment to the city? I imagine it was next to nothing for a while, but I'm wondering what it was, if it was addressed at all.
Jay?
Push the button. It's the one that says push.
Fancy. The negotiations and really the pre-negotiations of the agreement between the city and the gardens really centered around protecting the gardens from going bankrupt. That's how bad it was. They could not make the payments. And in some of the first analysis that went back to the council, the rent was actually looked at as $1 per year.
Right.
With every dollar that was generated or made or whatever would go back into the gardens itself, which had not gone through really any improvements or any retrofits for 3 or 4 or 5 years. I don't remember the total. There, in my recollection, there was never a feeling that there would be a repayment of the purchase by the leasee, or in this case, Gilroy Gardens, because if there was, they wouldn't have sold it.
Okay.
Because they had already a repayment schedule.
Okay, so just to clarify, never mind the repayment then, let's just go to the dollar. The $1 a year, was that contemplated to be forever? Because I think the Gardens Board has done a fabulous job of reinvesting money into
It
the...
lasted one meeting until Andy got hold of it and said, you can't do it. So we had to come up with a system that was trying to be fair with some generation of money to the city, at the same time still trying to keep the basic premise of trying to put as much money back into the gardens to keep it sustainable. And that's where this EBITDA thing came from and so on.
I understand. I'm just trying to get a handle where this many years later, if the expectation back then was that we'd be here in 2020 and still looking at some, I mean, when I just take the $13.6 million at the Lease 2.5% interest rate, it's $325,000 just if we had that money sitting in the least rate of return possible account that you could have. So this many years later, that's just what I was wondering, if that was the thought at the time, that we would be in 2020 in this situation.
Specifically for payback for more money for the city, I don't remember that
Not,
being
not payback, just a lease payment. We're a
yeah,
landlord.
Lease. I don't remember that ever really being any more than the EBITDA discussion at the beginning. And a lot of that had to do with the fact that there were other reasons that the city council was very interested in purchasing that property. One is it got control of that property, and if you remember at that time, the Hecker Pass specific plan was going full blast, and there was a lot of play on that, of trying to save the agriculture and things of that nature. So that was one of the reasons the council did it at that time. They also thought it was a pretty good deal. 536 acres for 13 point some million dollars, which...
I don't mean to belabor it. I was just wondering if we're in 2020 now, and if that's where the vision would have been back then. So thank you. I understand all the reasons why the council at the time did it. Thank you.
Can I also have a question? It would probably be beneficial to everyone if you could refresh everyone's mind about the structure of how it works with the board and the land and the Gilroy Gardens, because when your first question back was Gilroy Gardens is not supposed to repay it, I think she was talking more about the whole. So what's the structure maybe of how it works?
The organizational structure?
The organizational structure. I think it would be beneficial for everyone to.
So Greg or Barb, did you want to talk about the organizational structure of the gardens and how you guys function in relationship to the city?
Relatively trying to be as simplistic as possible. The city owns the land and the assets, which is a little unusual for a situation like this. So the Gilroy Gardens Family Theme Park, Inc., the organization, the 501c3, owns computers and desks. And then my understanding, and Jay can speak more to that, my understanding of why that was set up that way was that if the city ever wanted to sell their asset, that there weren't two entities owning things, that it was all together. And in fact, any money that we put in then gets transferred to the city's books. A little unusual. The Gilroy Gardens Family Theme Park, Inc., the nonprofit, is run by the board of directors. They hire a professional theme park company called Cedar Fair to do an overlay to protect liabilities. And they pay 10% of the net income a year, or what we call EBITDA. That's if that helps.
So then the lease is with the Gilroy Gardens Board, Inc., or whatever you discussed, you're saying?
Yes.
And the two entities?
Correct.
But it's for the whole 500
Yes, it is for the whole 536 acres.
Not just the Gilroy Gardens theme park.
Correct.
So I think that's what's the confusion for most people in the community, the difference between the whole thing and just the theme park. How it operates.
The board was given the purview for all 536 acres. Again, I think, Jay, you can speak more to why.
Well, one of the major reasons is and correct me if I'm wrong, there's 12 or 15 major facilities that the gardens use that are on the bottom portion. Maintenance yards, storage facilities, the major water pump system for the whole, it sits on that lower. Up on the upper, the open space, Lake Catherine, which is all the water that comes down into the lake that we all know about. So to get control of the full operation, you needed control of those properties at that time. And that's basically why. Now, one of the things that was discussed was at some point in the future is that a conversation would occur on what should or could happen on those other pieces of property. And I think that's kind of what we're talking about tonight.
Okay, so Greg, you were asking Rob a quick question, I guess, and then we could jump into this.
Well, Rob, I wanted to get from you, you shared with us several times some of the vision that's been talked about as far as the whole Hecker Pass, from Gilroy Gardens through Hecker Pass, all the way down to the sports park. Can you tag in on that?
Happy to, thanks. There's not 3 minutes behind me, right? Up on the clock. I don't get let out of my cage very often, to speak my mind, but I'm going to take the opportunity to do it.
Well, I want you to take the opportunity, but I will time you if I have to.
I know it.
I got Councilmember Tucker over here chomping at the bit.
Well, thank you. No, I'm going to go from where you guys were up to about 30,000 feet because I'm, as Greg mentioned earlier, I'm a planner by profession. When I look at things, I look at them a little bit differently than a lot of people. But I need that simplistic, big picture idea and vision, if you will, of different situations, no matter what it is. In this case, I have the honor and of being able to sit on this board. But prior to this, I've had other projects I've worked on within Gilroy, and even before that, I started in Gilroy doing jobs 30 years ago. It was my first job here in 1990. Moved here 5 years after that, and actually lived behind what I believe what is one of the greatest assets that Gilroy have, which is the Uvis Creek corridor. And we're right on Crawford Drive, backed up to the levee, and that was our playground, going sitting in back over there, right behind us, as well as the hills and the scenery behind it. Since that time, there's been a lot of planning going on, both the city level and at project levels, focused on Uvis Creek and everything that's associated with it. And so what Gilroy has, I believe, is an asset and truly something that they can capitalize upon for not only the community, but to solve a lot of other issues in Gilroy too, with perhaps bringing in tourism and others. You have this linear park, which is, think of it as like maybe a mall or something like that. It's anchored at both ends. You have the sports park at one end, Gilroy Gardens at the other end, Christmas Hill Park in the middle, all linked by miles worth of trails that are even not quite complete at this point, but soon to be completed with the construction of the Highway 152 trail in Hicker Pass. All these are linked together and provide a tremendous asset for that. So having Gilroy Gardens and the land associated with it, which is owned and controlled by the city, is highly unusual. It's very, very unusual for cities to have that at their disposal. So in order to I guess I'd say to complete the vision of all those assets and link them all together and do it in a very proper way and a way that benefits everybody, especially the community of Gilroy, we need input. The gardens, Gilroy Gardens has a little bit of control over there. The city has ultimately most of the control, and they take directions from the citizenry. So whatever's decided on that property should keep all that in mind. It's not just Gilroy Gardens, it's not just 30 acres in the front of Gilroy Gardens or even the hillside behind it. It's everything linked together. And how can you leverage that to come up to complete the vision, if you will, or to form an even more clear vision of it? So I would say, with that in mind, try to zoom out a little bit, picture it all together, picture how you use that. Hopefully everybody here has had the opportunity to go up and down the levee trail and go as far as you can go on that, but imagine that ultimately connecting to Gilroy Gardens and what could happen once you get there. So what goes over on the other side of the creek, that's up to council, it's up to the the framers in the city, and they'll take directions from many of the people in the audience and others as to what they'd like to see out there. So that is my vision. It's not necessarily anybody else's, but that vision started with what the city originally envisioned there 2 general plans ago. So, keep that in mind when you're making decisions and providing input on this, and hopefully other people can see just a part of my vision. Did I make it under 3 minutes, Roland?
At the risk of you taking more time, let me ask you a question. Rob, you've been part of the last general plan. You've been part of this general plan. What does the general plan say about that whole area?
Well, in the backbone of that open space component is the Uvis Creek corridor. And that component links a lot of different subcomponents of that, if you will. For instance, in the open space element and natural resources element, it discusses Uvis Creek Park, and then along with that, you have Christmas Hill Park, which was the first piece. The sports park came later. Gilroy Gardens was not necessarily there, but the area upon which it sits was considered as over 20 years ago in the 1990 general plan, or I think even prior to that, because that was designated visitor serving commercial or visitor serving at that point, which was part of the reason, if you recall, why the council decided to take control of that property, because I think at least one council member or two are still on the dais at this time said we need to take control of that property, because if you just let somebody come in and build upon it, as you are allowed to do under the general plan and zoning, it could become, I think, auto repair. There's a number of uses that can happen in there. Nobody wanted to see that just, be turned into something that wasn't suitable for the area.
But with regards to the Hecker Pass area and specifically the 700-plus acres that are there now, it's visitor serving.
The lower part is visitor serving, and the upper hillside part is open space.
Okay, great, thank you.
Mayor, can I ask a question? Thank you. And I don't know who would be able to answer this, but I want to sort of go back to Councilwoman Blankley's question. And so again, it's my understanding that when the lease was put together back when, I believe it was a 4-3 vote, so there must have been some sort of concerns, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm just going off of memory and sort of research, but in my understanding, it was going to be 10% of whatever Gilroy Gardens brought in would go back to the city plus the dollar, right? And when you look at the average sort of, let's call it payback to the city, you're looking at probably about $115,000 per year on average. During those initial discussions, was there ever talk about that those figures would go up, and what's keeping it from? And I know it's the recession. It could be lack of sort of people visiting the amusement park, but I think going back to what the initial agreement was in regards to, and what's kept sort of the garden from sort of paying back the city a little more each and every year. Does that question make sense? I don't know who would be able to answer that.
The contract, and Andy, this goes back a long time, it's wound up at 10% of EBITDA,
Okay.
which is not 10% of gross.
Right.
Because it wanted to take into effect the money being turned back into the system to bring that park back up, because if it hadn't, the park wouldn't be here today.
Right.
What has been found over the years, and I learned this myself, is a basic premise of the entertainment business, is that for a park to succeed, you have to, one, keep it up.
Right.
And two, you have to bring in new product, whether that's programmatic product or that's, in the Great America example, that's a roller coaster.
Right.
We haven't been roller coasters, but we've been water, Oasis 1, Oasis 2. So for the time that I've been on the board, most of the money that we, sort of speak, make has been completely turned into either maintenance, deferred maintenance, ADA improvements, or capital. And that's why the city has received, probably over the last 4 or 5 years, an average of $80,000 to $100,000, somewhere in that area. I think the total has been about $1.2, $1.3 million, has actually come to the city in rent over the total length of time.
Okay.
But having said that, also there was a couple of years where I think we paid $4.
Right.
So you can see that the market really has an effect on that.
Don't you? No, and I agree with you. Sort of, to what helps an amusement park like this succeed. Obviously, bringing new products. And again, I want to thank the community for all their input. We get tons of emails, and I love what the vision is. That's not my issue. I would love to see it grow, but in regards to sort of what the city gets back in return, is it typical for a project like this where 10% is the norm?
That I don't know.
Okay. I'm just curious how that figure came about.
Different parks probably have different negotiations. Great America probably has a whole different approach with Santa Clara.
Right.
Well, I think the original vision was for the city gave us a charge to take care of their property, put money back into the property. At the same time, we had to grow. So the EBITDA payments since we started this in 2008, and you're right, Jay, in 2008 we delivered to the city $400. That was the year of recession. Next year we didn't give anything because we didn't make anything. Since then, the total EBITDA to the city has been $1,183,000. Monies that we put in deferred maintenance over the years, which we couldn't start. We didn't put $1 back into the property until 2011. The dollars weren't there. A little over $4 million. The amount of money of capital improvements that we did, Water Oasis 1, 2, what else? The Green Barn, etc. 7.7 million, and those are dollars that we turn back over to the city at the end of each year, completion of those. So we've turned over, it hasn't come in the form of cash, obviously, but a total of about 13 million, just under $13 million on there.
Yeah, no, and thank you for that. And the reason why I'm asking this specific question in regards to sort of the 10% is wanting to get a sense is that a good figure for the success of the gardens, but also to satisfy sort of the needs of the city. And that's where I'm sort of going with that. You know, again, is it something that we need to rethink, something needs to go higher or lower? I don't know what that is. And that's why I wanted to sort of get a sense of maybe some background.
There is an actual better barometer to that. And Barb, you gave us the figures of what these type of parks are supposed to make on rate of return and what we're making. Could you share that with, because I found that fascinating.
A couple of things that you asked me to research, which was what is the percentage of gross that the industry puts back into deferred maintenance? That's fixing things and looking after the asset. What is the rate of gross that they put into what they call marketable capital, which is those things which will attract a guest? Those two figures are for deferred maintenance between 1% and 2%, and for marketable capital between 8% and 9% of gross. Currently, we sit at 5% for marketable capital. That's a lot harder to save, and 2.72% for fixing things. So below the average, and we have chosen to put more into, percentage-wise, to put a little bit more into making sure that it doesn't fall apart than the new stuff. So from an industry standard, the margin, I think you're talking about, like EBITDA, the margin of a property, Cedar Fair runs at about 35%, 34.7% for all of its properties. That's sort of divided into two different groups, big parks that make 45% and smaller parks that make more like 25%. So that's what the industry is. Last year, for the first time, we broke 10 and got to 13 in an actual margin. This year, we will sit at more of a norm at 8. I think the average over the time since the city purchased it is a 6% margin.
So, Councilmember, or Fred, you had talked about the vision. Did you want to just go ahead and jumpstart this conversation then and just...
Yeah, I mean, again, and I think for me, I mean, just sort of just many discussions I've had with obviously members of the board and sort of administration from the Gilroy Gardens, and just sort of in general, I mean, I love the fact of sort of expansion, you know, again, economic development, you know, how do we get folks here? And I think for me, just sort of laying that out and sort of really being innovative in what we might be able to bring out here, I'm really open to those ideas. But I think the bottom line for me as well is really knowing the ins and outs of how sort of is it going to be financially succeed. And I think that's sort of my biggest concern is whatever decides to be built there, is it going to be successful over the long period of time? Because again, I love the fact that, you know, I mean, first and foremost, they hire our Gilroy residents. But again, I want something to be sustainable for 20, 30, 40, 50 years from now. And is that what the current vision is right now? I don't know, but I think with more input and sort of more discussions, it'll help me get to where I'm at. And I think for right now, I love the ideas that are coming out. It's just I want to dig a little bit deeper into that. I don't know if that answers the question, but yeah.
Okay, thank you. By the way, Councilmember Peter Leroy Munoz, is stuck behind a major accident on 101, and so he will be here as soon as he can. All right. Greg, is there?
Jane, could you speak to the ROI on tourism for us and give it a little bit of what that does as far as?
Oh,
We made it.
thank you for being here.
So obviously, tourism, which we all say we like, if we want, has its ups and downs. And the bottom line is, Fred, we all wish we could guarantee success 20, 40 years down the line. And just like any business, it changes. So right now, well, historically, Gilroy has had a great return in terms of having our garlic notoriety worldwide, our shopping. And we've really capitalized on that with using our Tourism Business Improvement District dollars to make Gilroy a destination. So since we launched that TBID, we've doubled the TOT that's gone directly to the city coffers. So what is Gilroy Gardens? How do they contribute to that? The board, and Barb hears me all the time, my dream, my vision is a 365. If you really want to be a tourism destination, you need something 365. That's one reason why we have created this road to garlic, because you can experience garlic 365. So as we look at what's beneficial to Gilroy Gardens, which currently is open about 9 months per year, you look to say, okay, what could be compatible and synergistic that could help the gardens possibly even expand those hours, but also have shared possibilities with revenue, parking, et cetera. And that's when you start saying, okay, there's other possibilities in those hillsides or down below. But as your EPS study showed, to actually create value for the ground below, you need something going on 365. Hotels just don't show up and say, oh, that's a nice piece of property. Our wineries are lovely, but there's just not enough mass there. So as you look at the tourism message, we rely heavily on Visit California, which is a heavily data-driven organization. And I just came back from San Diego last week, and I could go on and on about some of the new numbers. Just an aside, with the coronavirus, Visit California is expecting a 27% decrease in our Chinese visitation. We've seen about 25% less at our location. So all of those unknowns can come up. But the point is, if you're committed to tourism as an economic development tool, you're always shifting in and saying, okay, how do we make this work? And that's what we do. And so that ROI is always got to be demonstrated for you as a stakeholder, to our hotels, to our community, because tourism creates quality of life. And that's the message we're going to keep working with, but it shifts.
Jane, thanks for that. Rob, thanks for sharing your vision on that. I wanted to just kind of get a feel from the city council and each one of them on what they saw as their vision for that property and that pass over there.
If you don't mind, I'll just, both of us have raised our hand, and so what I wanted to get back to the point of, well, it's very important that the money was reinvested back, but it was reinvested back to the theme park. If some of that money had gone to some of these other ideas that are coming forward now, instead of just the theme park, I mean, where would we be today? I don't know. It's something that we should explore. So while, yes, a lot of millions and millions of dollars have been reinvested back in, it's been reinvested back into those 70 acres and not the rest of the, so whether that fulfills the original agreement or not, I don't know. That's questionable. For me, I was on the planning commission when we went through all this, and my vision was kind of a lot different than what I envisioned, an open park for the citizens of Gilroy. It was parceled off, and that there was, at one point, there was an old pool there. There was a whole bunch of things that we had, when I had been given the drive around tour way back in the beginning, I saw possibilities as being on the planning commission that this could be another Christmas Hill Park for Gilroy residents, so things have changed from then till now, but that's what my vision was originally. Everything that's been presented to me from our tourism board and from Gilroy Gardens in the past are all things that I would support in general. It's of course, the adventure park would be wonderful with the bike and everything. I doubt very much it would pass CEQA, but I mean, there are a lot of opportunities to do with that land other than something that's going to enhance Gilroy Gardens as a theme. I don't know what those opportunities are, but I'm very open to listening to them. The question really is where the council collectively wants to go. And we, as a council, have not had that discussion. So we're just listening. Me personally, I'm in favor of promoting economic tourism and what we can do. It may not necessarily be through Gilroy Gardens as a theme park. It may be another entity come and utilizing the adventure park with the bikes, or some other thing that could happen in that property. Or let's go back to the original deal of we were saving that land for Gilroy residents way back in the beginning to have it another kind of a great, wonderful Christmas Hill Park, kind of deal with the pool and this and that. And there was all these wonderful talking way back then that convinced all of us at the time to agree to it and spend that money. Sure has changed since then. So,
Councilmember, so you and I have had, private conversations about this, and I just want to say right now I appreciate you being here, and that you are open to listening, to understanding what's in the best interest not only of the city but for the community as well, and that you're there can be no doubt that you're supportive of economic tourism for the city. So I do appreciate that. Marie, did you have something you wanted to?
Yeah, it might be a little different angle. It would seem to me, I understand the getting the gardens in the first place and the reasons for wanting to save it and how that was in the beginning. But this many years later, I'm looking at it and thinking the reason any business person, anybody who's on the gardens board who's a business person, or anyone else who has a business of their own, would be a landlord that really, in effect, doesn't get any rent, is for the inherent value in the asset that you own and the appreciative value that you think is there, and that sort of thing. And I guess you would have to believe that there's not an opportunity cost, that you're suffering from doing that. So when you're talking about $7 million getting reinvested back into the park, which I totally understand as being necessary to keep the park going, has somebody, and maybe this should be done on the city side, I don't know, but does somebody know whether or not that's adding value to the asset or just keeping it going? In other words, I could do certain remodels to my house that don't actually add to the sales price of my house. I do it because I like it, but nobody else is going to really care, So I'm wondering, A, does that much money add value? And then B, does that in fact mean that until that asset is sold, we're really not going to realize any financial gain from it other than the tourism dollars it brings in, but even that is difficult to quantify. I understand we have more tourism money, but how much is actually coming in our hotels from people staying there? It's just an awfully low amount that the city gets, and it would be fine if that's the only asset we did this on, but I've learned in my very short time on this council so far how many things we don't get paid for, that we just give away, and it's on the taxpayer's dime, and we don't have that kind of money.
So I can answer part of that. So the money that went back in, and believe me, we watch the P&L very closely, and Barb and her team do a great job with making money with the meager, ability with, not having like a huge thing like a Great America, but, we're kind of out there. You got to really want to come to Gilroy Gardens. And so if that money hadn't been put back in, there would be a fence around that park.
Understood.
Okay, and then that's going to cost even more. Okay.
You mean if we didn't sell it?
Whatever you did to it, you'd either have to maintain a null facility that wasn't operating, okay, find a way to sell it, whatever. But that money, and anybody that's had any history with this whole thing knows, and again, Greg mentioned about, the $400 and the $0 and the $100,000. That just shows you the vagaries of the economy. And so in a business, as you know, if you don't grow your business with the higher costs that happen every year, okay, every year you got, wages going up, you've got commodity costs going up. She has to grow that, for us, and we as the board stewards make sure that that's happening. And so all that money that went back into the park, the city owns. That's all
Right.
city property.
But did it increase the asset value? Like, does anybody know what the value is of that acreage?
Well, I can't answer that.
Yeah.
I said I could answer part of it. And
Right.
That's the part that I could
Okay,
answer,
so that's what,
which was
that's what I
what
mean.
would-
So that's right.
Well, I can tell you that, the city bought the property for 13.6, and I've heard numbers as high as 59 million worth when they bought it. So
Right.
you bought a piece of property worth $59 million for 13.6.
Which means nothing unless we sell it.
Well, that's right, if you could
That's what I
find a
mean.
buyer, so.
Right, but that's my point, and wondering if that's the only point I was trying to understand.
Okay.
Thank you.
Could I answer the other part of the question? The tourism impact? So our basic report that we received, we, the board, the Gilroy Gardens Economic Impact Analysis, that was done November 8th, 2019, with just the existing operations for the gardens. The tourism impact is 2.5 million, and the jobs impact is just under 8 million. So when you start adding additional amenities, for example, if we ever did a water park, that adds another couple of million, and on and on. So the studies have been done to document the impact from an economic impact.
Millions of what?
$2.5 million
dollars
annually
of
tourism dollars.
You're
That-
going to restaurants, you're
yeah.
going to hotels.
It's the indirect
in Gilroy.
in Gilroy.
Okay.
Is that what you're looking for?
Yeah, I guess I was. That's fine.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, Jay?
Just a comment on cats. Originally, you are 100% correct, is that the lower portion of the property was actually discussed in concept form as a public park, a fairly good-sized park. I don't know what Christmas Hill Park is, but it's probably pretty close to that. The board, in its original first mini master plan, actually showed that. In the master plan we just finished, we really left that as public use, meaning it's up to you folks what you wanted to do with it, because there had been discussion over the last several years that there was going to be something different than a public park. But that was one of the original intents, was to have that as a park and then access into the foothills somehow for biking or equestrian or whatever. The vision then, as Rob stated, was actually sold at the time the sports complex was purchased. We had to sell the council at that time that there was going to be a spine right down the middle with parks off of it and at the end of it. That would make something, as Dion Bracco said when we were purchasing this property, it would become the Golden Gate Park of Gilroy.
Okay. Councilmember?
I'm a big supporter of Gilroy Gardens. I'm very happy to be on their board. And I think the city council has to have a discussion in closed session about what we expect monetarily back from the gardens. Because in order to keep the park from going stale, we have to keep investing back into the park. And if we expect $100,000 or $200,000 more per year, I too have been on this council for a very short period of time, and I see that $200,000 go like that. I would rather have that money reinvested back into the park because we want it to keep growing. And I never knew that Dion had said that this could be like the Golden Gate Park of Gilroy, because it really can be. It could be such a great asset for Gilroy to have, especially with the sports park development, just like we talked about the Uvis trails and Gilroy Gardens sitting there. It would be a shame to even think of selling it to an industry that is very invested in amusement parks, because we don't have that local control over that land of what we want to do in the future. So I think we do have to have some very detailed conversations about supporting them, even if it means in a lease that doesn't demand more money. But we have to look at what we're going to get out of it for the citizens of Gilroy and for the youth that work out there.
Thank you. Barb, I know it's probably a year or so, well, no, probably longer than that. Probably, this was some time ago when the state was looking at increasing the minimum wage and the impact, we were looking at the impact to organizations such as the Gardens. What does the minimum wage increase annually translate to for the Gardens?
Every dollar in minimum wage increase is $500,000 a year.
So for every dollar that goes up in minimum wage, you have to, just to keep pace, you have to generate an extra $500,000.
Correct. So this year's budget will be $500,000 higher than last year's, and the next year's will be $500,000 higher than that, and the next year's will be.
Okay, thank you.
Mayor, can I?
Yes.
Can I just want to comment on Councilwoman Mark's statement that she just made. So you point out a really good point here is you look at the benefits of what can happen. Thank you, Jane. The 365, I mean, I completely agree with you on that. But again, I think sort of the elephant in the room, especially for several council members, is what's the city going to feel comfortable with in regards to return? And I think that's a discussion that we as a council need to have, because I agree. I think, maybe, and the reason why I asked about the 10%, maybe that needs to be higher, maybe it needs to be lower. I'm open to that, because again, I want to see this park, whatever development, succeed, but also want the city to feel comfortable with the return. And whatever that number is, I think we need to have that discussion, because if it's higher, lower, whatever it may be, then, and like Carol just said, seeing that money invested back into the park, because again, if it goes stale after 4 or 5 years, then we start to lose attendees. We don't want that to happen. And that's sort of when I said, what's going to keep it sustainable for 20, 30, 40, 50 years? And it may be where we say, yeah, we're going to take less, but we know what's going to happen to the park, and that the park's going to succeed. So again, I think we as a council need to have that discussion and come to some sort of agreement of what we're looking for, because until we have that, we really don't know where we're headed with this, if that makes sense. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. I kind of want to, I hear the concern from city officials regarding, how much money can be generated from the park back to the city. That's a question we're not going to solve here tonight. That's a question that we have to ask ourselves individually, and then as the council come up with what our vision is as a group and give direction to the city administrator when negotiating the lease. So I don't want us to get too bogged down in the numbers side of this. I know it's an important topic, but I think we need to zoom the microscope out a little bit and start kind of talking big picture here. And, how do we feel about the Gardens and the vision for the Gardens, so that we could lay those out on the table, and then collectively we could get together as a council, figure out what it is that we want to do. Councilmember Peter.
So, Mr. Mayor, I think you teed me up very well on that point, because from my understanding of the vision for the Gardens, I think you have to take it out even one step further back, in that you look at the region as a whole. And that really is the entertainment section of our city. I mean, that's what it is. And when I consider the region where you've got the wineries, you've got the golf course, you got the Gardens, you've potentially got an adventure park and bike trails and everything else, that really is a unified vision that kind of stitches all of those activities together. And I'm always thinking to myself, what is it about Gilroy that we have that is unique and that is a competitive advantage relative to other cities? And that entertainment region is something that is very unique to Gilroy. You're not going to find something like that in a Sunnyvale or a Los Gatos or a Campbell. That's the thing that we have that, frankly, they don't have. All due respect to those cities. So for me, I look at the Garden as kind of being like the anchor tenant, if you will, in that region. It brings the families in. You have the young kids who are working there. I was talking to one of my colleagues who actually grew up here in town and used to work over there at the Gardens when he was a teenager. And so it's got that kind of cultural and historical presence in the city. There's an emotional connection to the Gardens as well as an economic connection. And as we think about, what that number is, and Mayor, I agree with you. We're not going to get to that number tonight, and it's going to be several discussions that we have to have. But I think we have to also take a larger look at it too, in that what are some of the ancillary benefits, as Jane is sharing with us, whether it comes in TOT or in other forms of economic activity that's being driven in the city. So me, just speaking personally as Peter Leroy Munoz, my vision is having that as, again, our central tenant that kind of is almost like the gateway or the introduction for people to Gilroy, because you get them coming as young families. They get used to coming to Gilroy. As they maybe age out of some of the younger activities at the Gilroy Gardens, maybe they graduate up to an adventure park or to playing golf or whatever that might be. But anyway, that's just me riffing on what my vision is for the Gardens, but also kind of for the region as a whole.
And can you write down central tenant anchor for the? Okay. Yes.
I'd like to piggyback on that because I agree 100% with everything that Peter just said as far as what it does for the city, the anchor and all that. It's just, and I know we're not getting any discussion and anything about the numbers. It's because the numbers can't be better than they are because they would be already if they could be. That's my point about us being in 2020. So the numbers are what they are. All you have to do is look back and see that. If anything, they can only get worse. So I'm not expecting that to change. So I'm looking at it from a different standpoint, wondering how do we keep affording this? Because to use the anchor, which it absolutely is, then I'd have to put that same philosophy, if you will, onto the sports park and this possible ice rink that we're looking at. And would I, as a council member, suggest that the city build an ice rink for the Sharks at our expense? Because that's the same thing as what we did with buying the Gardens, is we build it and then that's an anchor out there and lots of other great things will happen, but that's a huge amount of money for us to be taking on. And usually, at least I would think, that when you're trying to attract businesses and things to your city, those businesses pay for themselves to come. They don't get to come rent-free and operate. So that's where I'm coming from. It's not that I don't think the Gardens are beautiful and wonderful and a great asset. It's that we would already be getting something better financially by now if it were possible. So we're dealing with what we've got, and we need to look at that and use that whatever criteria we use to justify that needs to justify everything else that we do. That is my position.
So of that acreage, Gilroy Gardens is only a small piece of it. There's a whole lot more that could generate revenue or something else. I don't know what. We've certainly had some proposals that have come forward, okay? And that's, can be part of what your additional generator can be for the city. And that's up to you guys to decide that. That's not, we are just stewards of the 501c3. That's our job, okay? Nothing more than that. Make sure that Gardens runs as good as it can possibly run. And, Marie, you said it, if there was more money, we would gladly give it to you. I'd love to give you 5 times as much, okay? Because that means we'd be 5 times more successful. But we're not. But we have the opportunity for synergy with that area there. And I love the way you put it as the springboard gateway, introductory, whatever you want to call it, as to get things going. You know, it really is. And so I think this is your opportunity. And you've got a willing board that's willing to work with you and help you with this stuff because you have a lot on your plate. You're running a big city, an important city. We all live here. We all care about this city. That's why we're here. You're on the council because you care about this city. We're on this board because we care about Gilroy Gardens, and we're asked to help out and gladly help. So, I think you have an opportunity here. And if you create, if we are aligned on vision, we can be in great shape. But we have to get aligned. And so part of, and I felt it was very important that we sit face to face and see each other so that, we can work with each other. We're people.
Thank you. Great.
Thanks, Steve. And thank you, Peter, for your vision. And I guess what the board is looking for from City Council, each one individually, is what is your vision for the property and how does our board fit into that for you? We've got some extremely talented people, professional, that spend a lot of time out there managing and helping our staff. And we want the park to succeed. And we think that we've lived up to our contractual obligation as far as keeping that park in good shape, growing the park. And if that is a different vision than the contract that we went into when you folks bought the property, we need to know. We need to know what your expectation of this board is, what you want for the future of the park, and we'll drive it for you if that's what you want, whatever that might be.
Okay, we've heard from Peter and Fred and yeah, I'm trying to go through the list of people. Well, I could tell you that. Oh, and Glenn. I could tell you that as far as I'm concerned, as I said earlier, it's an asset to the community. Mm-hmm. One of the things that the Gardens is doing now is getting ready for their 20th birthday party. And you have staff currently working there as young people who remember showing up there, going to the park for the very first time, being pushed in strollers by their parents, and going to the park as little toddlers. And now they're there working. To me, that has value. Yeah, I'd like to get extra money from the Gardens, but we don't want to be penny wise and pound foolish and suddenly put a great asset out of business because the city decided to get a little bit of extra money. I appreciate the work of the board. I think their dedication shows, and I want to make sure that this park continues for another generation, in politics. Well, anyways, I want to see this park be successful.
Mayor, can
All
I?
right, yeah.
Sorry. No, thank you. And again, I just want to go back to why I'm asking those questions about the sort of the financial aspect of things, because as you can hear, it's important to all of us, obviously. But just like the mayor said, and just like my colleague just mentioned, and several other colleagues, is what's going to be best for the community. And I think what I hear from a lot of the constituents is sort of going back to, well, how much does the city get back, and all those are great questions that should be asked, obviously. But in the conversations I've had with Barb, Paul, over and over, the benefits that we get from the number of jobs that it provides to the citizens, first and foremost, is very important to me. And I'm glad, as mentioned earlier, I'm glad the Gilroy Gardens Board is here, but having City Council here and having this open discussion is, I think is really, really good because it's going to make us think about, like you're hearing, is it really the number that we're looking at, or is it the overall benefit of what we can get out of this here? And I'm open to that, where I'm not looking for a specific number that's going to bring in loads and loads of cash. That'd be ideal. But for me, the bottom line is what's going to be the best bang for the buck for the gardens and then bring in economic development and bring people here. And like James said, 365. I mean, ideally, that's where we want to be. We might have to, say, hey, you know what, let's not be as aggressive when it comes to what we may or may not want, because again, overall, we want to see those things be of value to the community. Thank you.
Thank you. There was something that I did want to say. One of the things that I learned for a short time, I was on the Gardens board, and we did have a guest speaker there that really just highlighted something for me that was kind of an aha moment. And it was this idea of whatever gets developed out there, outside of the park itself, outside the proper, 50 acres or 70 acres, whatever makes up that park itself, it has to complement the park. It has to be an opportunity, whatever comes in there has to support the park either directly or indirectly. It cannot and should not hurt the park. And so as we start to look out at the vision for the entire 700 acres, we want to make sure that whatever attraction goes there ultimately will help the park. What we heard from the board is that if the council wants the board to take the lead and start working on creating some sort of projects for that area, they're certainly willing to do that. If the council says, no, we just want you guys to manage the park according to your, which is your charter so far, that's fine too. We just have to tell them that. But then the council needs to really think through and figure out, do we have the bandwidth as an organization to really move forward on capitalizing on the remainder acreage out there, and how does whatever goes on there going to at least, at the very least, help the park sustain itself. Again, we don't want to do anything that's going to hurt the park. So I just kind of wanted to throw that out there. As far as I'm concerned, I'm okay with given some sort of direction saying, board, we would like you to take the lead on developing something, with the understanding, though, that any final result has to come back to the city council for review and approval. And as part of that, obviously means planning commission review, public comment, city council review, public comment, before any final decisions are made. But I'm just throwing that out there as one person up on the dais. I'd like to hear from the others to figure out, expand a little bit on the vision and who should be responsible for leading any kind of effort.
Well, I'll just speak first because I pretty much have the opposite opinion of you. And most people have known that I am completely in favor of supporting the gardens.
Council member, just because you have the opposite opinion,
Is it okay?
I still respect you.
Okay, thank you. I don't want to come off sounding offensive to you, Mr. Mayor. But what I'm saying, what I want to be clear on is I'm always supportive of the gardens and thankful. As a previous youth minister, I'm very thankful. I know many, many youth that worked there. So I would want to continue that relationship and continue something that would benefit. If you have to reinvest again and again and again, I want to continue that. But the remainder of the land, I feel that it's our responsibility as the city to make those decisions and not to delegate it to another board.
Okay.
And we bought the land like I said, to be a park, and it's kind of morphed away from being a community open park. But who's to say that when we go down the path of having a Parks and Rec master plan update, which is due, the general plan is almost completed, and then the next thing are all these master plan updates and specific plans, the downtown specific plan, all these plans have to get updated, that won't be targeted as another open venue for a park, as we have stopped our goal of so many citizens per so many acres of park. Because when that property, let me be clear, when that property was bought, some of the money was taken from the Parks Fund that was, dedicated to be building new parks that didn't get done until new developments came along. Glen Loma built their park because it was a requirement of that development. But we had a goal as a city, so many citizens and so much acreage, and there was a plan in the general plan about that, and we took that and stopped that and used that money to buy Gilroy Gardens. If that's the direction the city wants to go again after having a master plan update, we may want to go that direction, and I don't want to be hindered by a lease of 535 acres to a different board. That should be the council and the citizens of the community making those decisions. Having said that, that doesn't mean there won't be, you said Gilroy Gardens will be an anchor. That doesn't mean that Adventure Park won't be a second anchor, and something else that will enhance Gilroy Gardens will be a third and fourth anchor. That doesn't mean we couldn't continue along that path. That's how I feel.
Okay, yeah. And I think even if we did go along that path, I don't think that path necessarily precludes an active role by the board in providing feedback to the city. Does that make sense? I mean, I think that's possible. All right.
Mr. Mayor, yeah, I was just going to say exactly that very last point. I don't think anyone would disagree that the council ultimately kind of has the final call on all of that. But nonetheless, I think we also are very lucky that we have a board that is as engaged as it is and wants to bring forth ideas. I would just simply ask as you guys do that, certainly try to keep us informed of those decisions. We don't want you to spend a lot of time going down one path if ultimately the council might find it not to be the way to go. But just involve us as you are generating ideas, as you're considering things. I think that way we kind of, again, avoid people spending more time or investing time in something that ultimately might not work out. But being active and coming with ideas, at least from my personal perspective, is something that I can appreciate.
Yeah, absolutely. Anybody else from the council want to say anything?
Mayor, can I ask a follow-up question? Maybe this question is for either Barb or Greg. And you've heard it over and over. Again, what's best for the city, what's best for the residents, and we as a council, we basically serve our constituents. We have to go out there and we serve the entire city. Barb, I understand there's a board, but do we have any subcommittees or community members that are not on the board that are part of this discussion? Do we have a permanent subcommittee that can be part of these discussions moving forward, so we're getting more and more input from the community?
We don't currently. I think that was the whole point of both tonight and what vision do you see for your property?
Right. Well, and that's why I bring that up, because again,
I think there's some people here tonight who.
I know I understand that, but I'm saying moving forward, I think that we should have a permanent subcommittee that is part of this discussions to make sure that there's input from not only from board members but from community members as well. I think that's vital for the community, because we talked about transparency, and I think by having more input from community members, it helps us with our decisions and sort of where we're headed down the road.
But that's what the Parks and Rec Commission, their responsibility is to be our advisory board on Parks and Recreation. Right. So I guess it would depend on how you define it. Are you talking about just Gilroy Gardens? Because I think that's kind of their business, in my opinion. But as far as a park, then Parks and Rec Commission. And so I guess I don't know what you're exactly asking.
I was talking specifically for Gilroy Gardens. I understand that's theirs, but I'm thinking, again, if we get a subcommittee, community members more involved in this here, then it can help shape exactly what we're looking for and what's going to be best for Gilroy. And I don't know if that's happening. I understand there's a board, but I don't know if that discussion's ever happened where we decide to get more community members involved.
Yeah,
That's just, again, just my thought.
no,
yeah,
I
yeah.
appreciate that,
Yeah.
and we, at the very beginning of this conversation, we talked about being honest and throwing everything on the table. With Kat, we kind of disagreed on the last point, but on this one, I agree that we do have a commission of Parks and Recreation individuals who represent the community to talk to us about certain things. We also have a council member who serves on the Gardens board. I'm not sure, what more, plus, I mean, I could say that we have the ultimate representatives of the community when we take a look at the board members that are playing a very active role. I mean, they have Gilroy's interest, I think, at heart. Okay.
Mr. Mayor, may I
Yes.
say something? That's a good idea, Fred. However, it would take, I think, some education on that committee's part to understand all of the repercussions, because there is a lot of money that's going to have to be spent if a major park went in on that acreage because of everything that Gilroy Gardens uses, the electrical, the water pump. They have to move their picnic facilities, warehouses, et cetera, et cetera. And if the city mitigates that, that's going to be around 22 million, correct, Mayor? Around 22 million? I don't know if we have that kind of money to spend on that. Plus, I think this whole discussion needs to go, hopefully in March, into a closed session, because I think the council has to make some decisions. We have to talk about the mountain bike company. Do we want to pursue that, et cetera, et cetera? We've never talked about that. We need to talk about what we really want to do with that lower acreage, or do we leave Gilroy Gardens still run it because they're using it right now and that is a source of their income? If we take away that income from them, how can we possibly ask them to pay more? We've just sent them in the other direction. And then it takes away from some of the capital input that they are going to invest in the park. It's just kind of like this big domino effect. So I think we have a lot of private conversations that need to be talked about and see how we're going to handle this whole money issue and then what our vision is, because if we want to expand, we need to start moving on that. We need to start talking and putting feelers out of who would want to come. And, at that point, with the 500 and some acres, maybe we do collect rent on that land and another group comes in to manage it. Maybe this board manages all of it. But there's a lot of questions, a lot of opinions, and a lot of discussion to be had. But hopefully in a few months, we can come back with some definite answers on the direction that we're going, because I think we're all in a holding pattern right now, going in circles.
I agree, and I think, as I said, this is only the beginning of our conversation, and the council's going to have some, honest conversations, something a little bit more than 5 minutes during a closed session where we really have an opportunity to kind of lay our cards on the table and see what we want to do.
One of the other alternatives is also to sell the whole kit and caboodle and try to save some of our coffers or trade some of the money off to pay for the ice rink. I mean, there's a lot of opportunities. So it's not just either the board runs it or the city runs it, and it keeps going or not keeps going.
What is the future of the park?
What's the future? But it's an asset to our city, and we as council members are responsible for that asset and how we benefit from it.
Right.
So it may be that we'll sell it for $59 million. You got someone who wants to give me $59 million. I may very well say, sell it and build, the ice rink.
At that point, I'd really want a lot of public input. I would want to hear from them. Would you rather have Gilroy Gardens or an ice rink? And I would hope all of our meetings would be filled with people to guide us on a decision like that.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think what I don't want to put words in your mouth, Cap, but I think what you're saying is that when we talk about it, we just need to lay everything out and figure out which approach, and it takes 4 council members to make the decision. But I don't think she's coming out and saying that's her position right now. Okay.
Roland?
So yes.
Make a comment?
Yes.
I think the board realizes this is not an easy subject for the council because there's a lot of perspectives here that could be justified and had credibility, even in support of the tourism concept. I think what the board is asking is prioritizing. This has been a long time that we're bringing ideas, that we've got things going, and there's a point where you're talking about loss, you talk about opportunity costs. Those opportunities go away. And if the council doesn't prioritize making some decisions, whatever those are, that no decision is a decision. So we really got to get that. I think as a group, somebody's got to be driving this and say, we need some answers. And this board is very prepared to move forward in whatever those decisions are, but it needs to know the decisions.
Yeah, I thought I said that earlier in that they just need to know, who's going to lead it. And if it's a city, I think what I'm hearing you say, if it's a city that's going to lead it, then the city needs to lead it.
And you need to lead.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, and then as far as the role of the board, are you guys, and Greg's walking away right now. Oh, does the Gardens Board see a particular role for you guys? Well, does the council see a particular role for the Gardens Board? Again, I could say I value the role that they're doing, and they've done a fantastic job of making sure that that park is attractive and clean and operational for the last 20 years, when I think by all accounts, most people weren't sure if it was gonna survive the first couple of years. So I want to see an active and healthy board, but I'm not sure where the rest of the council is and where the rest of the board thinks that their vision is. Greg, did you want to chime in?
Yeah, I just wanted to say thanks, Roland. The board needs direction from the city council. If you don't want us to explore ideas for the Hillside or any of the other property, fine, let us know. If you want to sell the property, fine, let us know. We'll go with wherever you guys want to go. It's your property. We're just, as Steve said, the stewards, and we're trying our best to keep it going and keep the property in good shape, improve it. But ultimately, it's your decision on which direction you want to go with it. And if you'll just keep us informed on what you want from us as a board, we'll work right with you. We'll partner with you.
And again, I don't know if we're making those decisions here tonight, but just sort of my own opinion is, I don't want to sell it. First and foremost, I don't want to sell it. I am.
See what you started, Kat?
But I'm not interested in selling it, and I understand the pros and cons, but I'm not interested in selling Gilroy Gardens. I am interested in sort of seeing sort of the vision and proposals and sort of what can be brought to the site. I'm very open to that. But I'm going to go back to what's been said over and over, is I do want the city to play a role in sort of, those decisions and, have some say or be part of those discussions as well.
That's great.
Yep.
That's exactly what we're looking from you guys. And we hope you don't sell the park either, because we've got a big passion for it. Rob?
Yeah. If I might, if it's the council's desire, ultimately the citizens' desire to continue with the gardens and try to create it in a sustainable way with a vision of the future, not just a short-term but long-term vision, I think it's going to be important for council to memorialize that in the form of policy of some kind, because it is a long-term decision to do that, and councils change and policies can change, but just keep that in mind. I'm not suggesting how you do that. I'm just suggesting that it be done in a very visionary way. And I'll tell you, I forgot to mention it earlier, but thinking of something that is possible, just a vision for the future and what might be possible for that. We had County Parks and Bay Ridge Trail people come and do a presentation to us a few months ago. That vision started 45 years ago, the Bay Ridge Trail, which rings the bay like that. And look at where they are now. Look at how much trail they've completed. Over 75%, I believe, of the trails. I probably got the figures wrong, but it was substantial. Just adding new trails. And they would love more than anything to have a trail connection through the gardens, connecting to our local. So you have regional trail. You got the De Anza Trail coming up from San Benito County along 101, connecting down at Pajaro and Llagas, which would form that link down there. I mean, that is so visionary and mind-blowing how big it is. How could that possibly be done? Well, guess what? We're pretty close to that. So imagine linking all that in Little Gilroy, and that being a hub for something that is a model worldwide of what can be done. So, you know, I'm sorry if I went too big on you, but that is a long-term commitment. And with that needs to be a pretty long-term policy commitment on the city council staff or part, or else if it's too easy to change from council to council, we'll just never get any traction. So that's the planner speaking.
And Gilroy could be an outdoor recreation destination. Woohoo!
That's a great idea.
I see the messaging already.
Yes.
Yeah, I think one of the frustrating things from my perspective sitting on this board is I'm one of the few people who have been on both sides of this equation. And I learned a lot being on this board for the last 12 years of understanding this business. It's unique. It's not city government, and it's not even close to city government. It has to be dealt with differently. The roles that our board has had has changed dramatically, and time is part of that change. But when we got on the board, Greg and I, roughly the same time, Tom Hagelin was charging us with a closure plan on the gardens of how much it would cost the city to keep it closed. And now we have moved all the way to where we are now dealing with sophisticated things like dealing with visitors, economic development strategies, and things of that nature. So when you're talking about this as a council, put it into those kind of contexts, is that, yes, roles change, but give it the vision of optimism, of how great that could be out there, using Peter's analogies out there of just with the wineries and all of that, but have the vision of optimism when it comes to this. Because this board is an optimistic board. We will make it work until we can't. And I think I speak on behalf of the whole board when it comes to that, is we'll keep that open as long as we can, under whatever circumstances, as long as we can.
Okay. Did you have something you want to add?
Glenn, do you want to tag in on that? Because you had quite a vision for Solis Valley and so forth. Pull your mic down there. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, Glenn Pace, name. I was originally invited to Gilroy by Bill Lindstedt. Some of you probably remember that name, EDC. And Bill coaxed me to come down to buy me lunch one day and convinced me that I should buy the land on Highway 152, which is now the McCarthy Business Ranch. It was Wellington Business Park, and we sold it to Joe McCarthy. And Jay was the city administrator at the time, and it was interesting. It became very obvious to us that until we solved the traffic problems on 152, absolutely nothing was going to happen. So we worked with the then city council and Jay and so forth, and came up with a grand vision for the whole area, and got the city council to set up a CFD, to sell bonds, to do all those improvements. And it's interesting. I remember standing one day down at the corner of the Onion Field, Nino Arroyo is now. I invited a retail expert from Las Vegas, one from Seattle, and one from San Jose to come there and give us some concept of what could happen there. Well, and I quote, 3 of them looked at me and said, "Pace, there's not a hope in hell there will ever be retail at this site." Now, obviously we marched forward and did it, and the city council sold the bonds, and we did the improvements, not only for our park, our business park, but for the two big shopping centers that are there and so forth, which, became a real asset in terms of revenue for the city and so forth. We then went up to the end of Mantelli to Country Estates, and it sat there for years and nothing happened and so forth. It's okay, what can we do with this thing? It's a beautiful area. I mean, I sat on a rock up there a couple of hours just looking at the area, and it's just gorgeous and so forth. So we bought it and we developed that and so forth. The point being is neither of those projects ended up being easy. In fact, they were extremely difficult through some of the exact same things we're discussing here today. But we didn't give up, and we did it. And now, about 11 years ago, Jane approached me to join the board, because I'd been on the EDC board for a number of years, and you well know, and so forth. And so, Jane, I know the park is in financial trouble, and it was. There's some question whether or not we're going to open the next spring and meet payroll and so forth. And we're large-scale land planners and developers, large master plan communities. That's what we do. We get a big chunk of land, we vision how can this thing look, what can we do with it? So I went to Gilroy Gardens and with my son David, and we walked around for several hours, just watched people, looked at the park, the quality, and so forth. And we looked at each other and said, look, this park is too beautiful for it ever to go away. It absolutely needs to be saved. Now, with my development experience and so forth, I said, maybe I can make some small contribution along the way to help that happen. But my canvas for that area, not unlike yours, it's not the park. Yes, the park is an integral part of that. It's the 536 acres. It's not even that. It's the Solis Valley. That's one of the most beautiful valleys in this county. And it to me, and I have a passion for this, it needs to be preserved and used for recreational and community benefits, and some serving retail and the other things and so forth. So, Jane can get all kinds of tourists to come down there and so forth. To me, it would be a crying shame to let that park go away. Now, whether the city does it or the board does it, that's not the issue. The issue is, how do you preserve it? Because I think it needs to be preserved. And we deal with cities all over California. And I was telling the board today, most cities would kill to have a Gilroy Gardens and a Solis Valley. They would. And I'm not sure that everybody in this community appreciates the asset that you have there with the potential that you have. It's great. And I think that it'd be a crying shame not to develop it to its ultimate use. Well, you can argue what that use is, but to its ultimate use. And to me, it would be your recreational, active, passive, maybe some visitor serving retail, some hospitality, those kinds of things. And with the wineries, all the way to Mount Madonna. That's a gorgeous area. So I guess I would just encourage this community to get behind preparing a vision for that area. And I realize some of it's in the county, some is in the city. That's an immaterial issue. You negotiate between the two and you make it work. That's what we do in our business and so forth. But come up with something that truly, that generation after generation will be so proud to have that facility and that park and that valley, that Solis Valley there, that it'll be an asset that I think everybody in this community will be proud of. I've gone down to Carmel Valley, and I drive up there, and it's nice. But it isn't any nicer. In fact, it's not as pretty as the Solis Valley. So if Carmel Valley can do it, why can't this valley do it? It can. It's just going to take the commitment to do it, and the passion and the enthusiasm, and yes, there's money involved. But there are ways to do that too. There are projects being built all over the nation. So that is not the thing that would stop this from happening. So anyway, that's all I had to say. And I don't even live in Gilroy. I live in Morgan Hill. But I have a passion for that park and that valley and that 536 acres, that I don't think that you can let that go away. Just
All right.
find some way to make it happen. That's
Thank-
all. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Glenn. Greg, next time, ask me to put the timer on him, please. Carol, yeah, Rob, I shouldn't have worried about you. Yeah. Carol, or Marie, yeah.
Does the gardens have a master plan? Right, do. So one option is to sell the master plan, right? That is an option.
Yes. Yes.
And that way, somebody in the know, in the business, can develop it to the master plan.
Yeah.
Since it is not the city business, the board has done the best they can in terms of money raised so far for it.
If
Okay.
I may, there are a couple of them. I think
Well, in the interest of time, though, not to... No, can answer, but I just meant... Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I think the ownership is important to the city, but the ownership isn't the major issue. It's the use of the property. That's
Exactly.
the issue.
Right.
Not the ownership. And if the city found a buyer came in that did this kind of thing, and you put the proper restrictions on, because remember, the city has police power. You can just have zoning, what you can't go in there and so forth. Even a right of rescission if they don't do what they say they're going to do, right? I mean, those things can happen.
Right, that was my point.
But to me, it is the ultimate use of the property, not actually whose name is on the deed that's important.
Yes, that's what I was trying to point out for those listening and watching, that's what we're...
I think that's what Kat was just talking about, is that is an option to sell the property if we choose to sell it. Whether it's to, change the zoning on it and put a bunch of houses out there, or we keep the same zoning and we sell it to an
No,
entertainment.
I think you're going a different way, but
No,
that's
no, no.
okay. That's not what I'm saying.
No,
That's what
but-
you're saying.
No,
Okay.
all I'm saying is, if we're selling it, we have some decisions to make as to who's purchasing it, and there's entertainment businesses out there that could purchase it and do something
Yeah,
with
to
it.
clarify, what I was saying is to sell the master plan. That's something that's already done. It's a master plan. If you sold the master plan, you're already limiting what can go, what can happen. You have a plan. That's what you're selling. I'm making a distinction between what I'm saying and what you're referring to, because they are different.
Okay, I'm not following. Say it again then.
You could sell the master plan, which could ultimately result in the change of ownership of the property. Maybe, maybe not. Maybe someone else is putting something there and you're still the landlord of the property. My point is, you could sell it with something that already has the vision attached to it. So you don't have to have these unknowns of housing or whatever else you're referring to. It's an option. It's something for us to discuss that I wanted to bring out.
Well, I believe that the city would need to envelop that master plan.
It would have to
and-
be created as an official document,
Yeah,
as a master
and
plan.
own that
Yeah.
plan.
Yeah,
You know,
fine.
I mean, we came up with.
I'm just saying there are ways.
It's pretty good, I think, but it needs to get codified and done the right way.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. Let me turn to Carol.
I just want to raise a point, though.
Yes.
I just want to raise a point because not how many, 2-3 years ago now, when an opportunity comes, sometimes we're faced with a decision, and don't forget Great Wolf came, and that was supposed to do all these wonderful things, and in the end it didn't work out. But I'm just saying that without that type of master plan, this kind of opportunity that comes, you can either jump on it or not. Now, not everybody was in favor of it as far as the citizenry, and I think Gilroy Gardens endorsed it. Yes, Gilroy Gardens endorsed it. So I'm just saying that, there's good and bad points about a master plan, because if that opportunity came again, it was a whole different thing, but it wasn't part of the master plan, we wouldn't be able to do it. And that was supposed to be an economic driver, right, a revenue driver. So it goes back to, we all have to think about all of these things, because that was a real opportunity that we spent a lot of time and energy discussing, staff discussed. We had many, many, many meetings, and in the end, it didn't happen, but they went to another city. I'm just saying that's a lost opportunity, but we don't want to, I don't know. That's something that we have to talk about as a council as well.
Okay, let me remind the audience here, if you want to address the gardens and the board, please fill out a yellow card. Shauna, I see a few in your hand. Hang on a second. How many do you have? Okay. Let me turn to Carol. Is there any final comments, any final thoughts as the council rep that you would like to share with everybody?
I think it's all really been covered. The only final thought I have is that we need, just like Kat said, we need to start talking about this, and we need to do it sooner rather than later to bring some closure for the board on what we expect from them. Also, you know, what do we want out there? We've never had that discussion on what we want it to do. It's been very short, you know, 2-3 minute discussions but no formal vote. So hopefully, you know, we can start next month and start these discussions and then get some closure to it in a couple of months. I don't know. I like to move fast. Just so everyone knows what's going on and what's happening. But I'm like Fred. I do not want to sell the gardens. I believe in them, and I think there's a lot of opportunity for that whole area. Just how we manage it, who runs it, you know, that is a big discussion. I'd like to know how much we could get for a master plan, though, if that's the route we decided to take. I don't know, a lot of questions. So, thank you.
All right, Greg, is there anything else from the board before we hear from the public?
Well, I just wanted to take a moment and thank City Council for their time this evening. Also my board for you guys coming out and spending some extra hours. I look out in the audience and I see half a dozen docents out there and Joel Goldsmith, who used to be on our board, who helped us dramatically in some of the early stages of the purchase. And again, thanks for the time.
Thank you. All right, Shauna.
Patricia Benson, followed by Susan Mister.
And Shauna, do you have a time clock or something?
I do, yes.
Count on your fingers and toes?
Okay.
All right.
Patricia Benson, I'm on the Gilroy Parks and Recreation Commission. I've been the chair for the last 2 years, and just recently I'm just now a regular member. I want to say that the Gilroy Parks and Recreation Commission would really like to have involvement with the Gilroy Gardens Board. The council has a representative. We would like to also volunteer to be a representative on your board. And I put that out there. And one of the things, as you know, I've been going there with my kids and grandkids ever since it opened. I don't want to see it go away. I think it's one of the greatest assets we have. And I realize, you know, it could be run maybe a little better, stay open longer, stay up until 8 o'clock. I used to go there for dinner after work when I worked here at the city. Now I can't even, 5 o'clock, I'm out of there. So that would be one thing for me. As far as, I'm also on this California State Association of Parks and Recreation Commissioners and Board Members. I'm the board director. And I had a board meeting here, and I brought members from other recreation departments and commissioners, and we got to go to the park. We got a donation from the park, Gilroy Gardens, for these commissioners to go, and they were just in awe of what we have here and the potential that we have. The one other thing, though, that concerns me is on the structure. This has nothing to do with the gardens itself, but the structuring of the loan or the buyout, using the funds that are going for parks and other impact funds. Those are going not paid back. I mean, we have 2 park sites that don't have funds. It's not your fault. You're getting charged 10% of your revenue, and that's reasonable, but the city needs to be putting the money back into these funds somehow. Okay? I don't know, but that's the issue. It's not to blame these folks, not to blame the park. The structure of that original deal. I realize we had the recession, but we're long past that recession now, and we're full steam ahead construction. And one of my commissioners also here, how does the Gardens Board Commission communicate with the City Council other than this kind of a meeting? I realize there's a rep, but that's kind of curious. And when you have these other bigger plans like the rink with the sharks,
and the potential that we have in that wild place was going to go at the gardens, and now this trails thing. We don't get to hear about any of this stuff, and we kind of feel like, well, we're here to advise you, and you don't include us in your comments or your studies. So we're here to help and volunteer. We'll do it besides the commission. So I just want to let you know. Thank you. And thank you, folks, for your volunteer.
Susan Mister, followed by Mark Turner.
Good evening, Council and Gilroy Gardens Board. I am Susan Mister, a neighbor of Gilroy Gardens and a 12-year docent, so I'm going to come off a little biased, full disclosure. Do not sell this prime piece of property. It is our western entrance into the city. It is a gold mine. I'm not complaining about the traffic on Hecker Pass. I was not the one to complain about Great Wolf coming in. But I have to say, there is a way to do this. It's not always about the money. In business, you're going to spend money to make money. You've got to take risks. This is a prime place to take your risks. Fred, you wanted to know about community involvement? Look at the 135 docents that put in their hours to keep that park running. Can you imagine what it would cost the city, or what little money you would see from the city if that was all employees? I remember Barb being here, I think it was 2 years ago, discussing the minimum wage and what she would have to do to keep that garden going. She did it. She did it by expanding the evening hours, and the evenings have been very successful. I think she can do it again. I mean, we cannot look at this past year. Business has been rough ever since the shooting, right? And then with losing China, our #1, I think, attendees that come in to visit Gilroy. So without looking at this year, I think it's been great, right? And I think there's a lot more things that can be done as well. I don't know, well, okay, you guys all know about that Gilroy Gardens is not just about the amusement park. It's an educational, 501c3 was mentioned, with natural science days, collaboration with the chamber, collaboration with Rebecca's, and right, collaboration with bridal fairs, maybe, collaboration with GUSD. There was a super big event that we did there as well. Maybe this is where we need to go. As a 501c3, what can we attract into us as being a tax benefit for those types of organizations outside of our immediate area? All I can say is I'm #1 on economic development, #1 on tourism. So whatever you need to do, don't lose your anchors. You look at a mall, you've got your anchors, and then everybody starts filling in between, right? My goal, my vision, has always been a convention center where we can bring in 400 people. I thought that was a prime area, but Barb corrected me saying we don't have enough out there yet. So my encouragement is to build up that area, even though it is in my backyard, I'm not going to complain about it, and then fill in those pieces so that we can get something going there, right? Also, I do want to say, because you brought up Great Wolf, just be prepared as you start to move things in that area, even if it is economically positive for the city, what you are going to hear from the Eagle Ridge people. And if you, those are the people you need to educate about this. And if you sell this to a developer with housing, you know you're going to get people in here. So you want to hear what your community has to say, educate them first. Thank you. And thanks again for being here. Just save this park.
Thank you, Susan. Appreciate you not complaining, because there's plenty of other people that will.
Good evening, Mayor, Council, Board members. I just wanted to say kudos to the Gilroy Gardens Board members for the work that you've done. There seems to be long-term investment on your part, so thank you for what you've done for our community. And many have said it. I'm going to reiterate what many of you have said, and that is really it's all about vision. There's a great proverb that says, where there is no vision, the people perish. And quite frankly, if there's no vision for the park, the opportunities will perish. And so opportunities come and go, as we have learned, and it's important to take advantage of those opportunities that come along. We talked about sustainability early on, and the fact is sustainability and profitability require ongoing investment and creative new ideas. One of the questions I think you'll need to ask yourselves is, do you want a revenue-generating interest out there or a non-revenue-generating interest? Once you decide, you can create that vision. I think at some point you need to turn that over to these professionals and let them do their job. get out of their way and let them do what they do best. They have proven themselves, I believe, over these last 12 or so years and are doing a very good job. But really, whether that vision is to build, develop, or to sell, you just need to come up with whatever that vision is and communicate that vision. The other thing I think you need to ask is, are there other cost recovery efforts that you can begin to focus your attention on? I know at some point in the past, recent past, the board or the council had the opportunity to do some cuts, to recover some costs, and I think chose to do other things. But if you're talking about generating revenue, the other side of that coin is cutting costs. And there's certainly options available to you to do all of that as well. So with that, thank you for your time.
Ray Avisovich, followed by Mary Newton. I'm sorry, Matt Newton.
Thank you, Mayor, Council, Board members. First of all, I just want to say I want to keep the Gilroy Gardens theme park. I think it's awesome. I think it's something that the community can build on. I appreciate all the effort that's been done. It's just amazing to me on the scope of the revenue that you guys have, how beautiful that park is and how it looks to be innovative, it looks to be approachable, looking for new venues and that. So I appreciate that. I think it's a shame to invest all this amount of time and energy from all these people and their visions and then look at saying we need to sell or to do this. And I understand all the economic parts and all the other things that are going on in the city, but I think we need to take a look at that. And the reason I'm up here is every year my wife and I, we go up to San Francisco and we go up to Fort Mason, okay? We go to a Zen Fest there. My God, there's thousands of people there. Years ago, back in the 30s or whatever it is, the vision was to knock it down because it was just, it's an old fort facility. Who in the hell is going to use this thing? Let's knock it down and put something here. Now look at it. It makes more money than anything. So I just think we need to get a vision what it is. I'm not sure if the wineries would be interested in having a Zen Fest there. You know, that would be great for them to partner with them. You know, so I think we need to look at how do we bring in small local business to use that facility in a way for everybody. Small business is hurting everywhere, okay? Brick and mortar is going. So we have an opportunity to change that, you know, to have our local guys that are out there sweating every day, showing up every day to work, trying to make a living, keep their businesses open. We should find a way to help them if we can use that. So the wineries are a good place. My son and I, we walked up on Pierce Road up in Saratoga. Driving around up there, and I'm thinking, hell, we're lost. We made a wrong turn. I go, where in the hell are we? How do we get out of here? All of a sudden, there's this sign that says archery trail. I go, archery trail? What the hell is that? So we park, we start walking out there, and here's a whole plethora of kids walking along this beautiful trail with their bows, with their family, and off to the side, you walk along, and then you've got a target to shoot at, okay? Some across the ravine. You got to be careful because you can't retrieve some of your arrows. I'm thinking, this is awesome. So I figured, it's going out. I go, how do we pay? And at the end, there's a bunch of young kids out there learning their stuff. Mom and dad are teaching them. And the next thing you look up there is, can you give a donation? What? I mean, everybody's trying to charge and do everything. Here's beautiful facilities. And the last thing was talking about, if one of the issues is to sell this place and then invest in the sharks, okay? All right, I just got to say this. My contractor, his son is 13 years old and is on the national team. He's the goalie. He was in Boston with Don Gustafson, the guy that does all the stuff for the Sharks. Oh, I'm sorry. So I'll just finish real quick.
Just wrap up your thoughts.
Okay, real quick. And so Jason asked him, I texted him, hey, ask him about that. He just looked and had no comment. Okay, didn't say anything. And the feeling Jason had is that not sure what's going on or what is in there. So have we traveled to Fremont or to the East Bay to see the other youth shark facilities to see what they've done? Did they have to pay to put it in? Yeah, okay. So anyway, that's me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Matt Newton, followed by Mark Vivian.
Hello. I'd like to start off with, I do love Gilroy Gardens. 3 of my kids have worked there. 1 still does. I came because I thought I was going to hear more about the bike plan. I got an email that come to this and learn more about it. I would love to see, it's a beautiful mountainside. I'm glad Gilroy owns it. I would love to see the bike park being built, if either through Gilroy Gardens or the 2005 bike plan that came out. That was an awesome idea, and I was excited to read that years ago, along with the Bay Area Ridge Trail that was presented to go through there. The bike park or trails up there would be a huge asset for the community. I would love to take my kids up and ride these trails or hike or whatever that is deemed acceptable. Don't necessarily like the idea of an ice rink going in. I like the park itself. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here.
Mark Vivian?
Good evening, council members, Mr. Mayor, and Gilroy Garden Board. I address tonight not board member of the Gilroy Chamber of Commerce, but as a citizen of Gilroy and a resident of the village. We're faced with a tremendous opportunity to further promote Gilroy as a destination, bring money to the community, further the cost of healthy living and education. And following on the comments of mountain biking, I'm an avid mountain biker. Nothing would be more cooler to me than asking my friends to come on over, because I'm too old to go to Gilroy Gardens now. I'm too old. But I'm not too old to mountain bike or explore the hillside that we have in our own backyard. So somehow come together, make it work, because my friends would love to come by and mountain bike, and I love to show them Gilroy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mark. Is that it? Okay, I'd like to thank the audience members for their comment. Back to the garden board and the council for any final thoughts. Anything? Craig? Nothing? Good? Folks, come on up.
Good evening, mutual boards, council, mayor.
State your name, please.
Yes, I'm Patrick Flott. I'm the vice chair of the Bicycle Pedestrian Commission. So I've listened to everybody tonight. There's a lot of really interesting ideas on the table, and I believe a lot of this that I believe is a standstill between all parties could be addressed by more communication. Fred made a wonderful idea about a permanent subcommittee, and Kat made another suggestion about using our Parks and Rec Commission. I'm for whatever process starts a mutual dialogue and keeps this going consistently. There's many ideas floating on the table, many vested in the history of this prior city council, and I'm not really aware of the changes in the board for the gardens. I'd assume it's pretty consistent. I would like a discussion that sort of loops the citizens back into this process. I want the citizens to know what the plans are for the future, for the expansion of the gardens, assuming that we keep them. I want to know if the best practices in theme parks are being evaluated. What is successful for a typical population of our size? Are we looking at the right rides and attractions? Are we investing the money in a consistent way that adds more value? I want to be looped into that process, and I want to see updates given to City Council. If it takes a permanent subcommittee that overlaps both boards, that's what I would be for. I want more engagement, and we deserve that much from City. Thank you.
Thank you for being here. Shauna, that's it. Last chance, everybody else? Good? Yes.
One last comment. At our meeting today, we did come to a conclusion that when the council, whatever process you go through, comes up with your vision or wants to continue this conversation, we'd be more than willing to sit down with you at a meeting like this or anything that you call to be able to pursue this further.
Appreciate that. I think there is a willingness. I don't want to speak too much for the council, but I think what I heard is that there is a willingness on the council's part to have another discussion, obviously internally in closed session, kind of figure it out how we want to proceed. And then it is my hope that this is the first of future meetings between the council and the boards, whether it's something like this or something different, where we're able to exchange ideas, because I do think that we all have the garden's interest at heart. All right? Thank you so much.
But
Meeting
can I
adjourned.
ask, I would like to ask, what is the reasoning behind not allowing a Parks and Rec commissioner be at least sitting in and at the board meetings for Gilroy Gardens?
I don't.
No, I don't. Can someone address it on the board?
Well, that's something that we certainly can consider. The board is currently made up of 7 members, and we can take a look at our bylaws and discuss it as a board and see if there's a fit.
I'm just saying it to have that community overview as a citizen overview, not necessarily as a businessman.
Well, nobody's ever asked the question before.
Oh, okay.
That's the first time I've heard that ever brought up, right?
Well, and if I may add that, and that's why I asked, but it seemed to be some reluctancy in regards to that, but I think you're hearing it from different members. I think that's an important piece to it. So if it hasn't been asked, it's been asked not once, not twice, 4 times tonight. So I hope that you will take that into consideration and get others involved as well. Thanks.
Okay. Good. Meeting adjourned. Thank you.